They didn't understand him, and they were afraid to ask him what he meant. Man, I took some comfort in that reading as I studied this week. I wonder if maybe sometimes Jesus made references that the disciples didn't make. Like I could just imagine him saying, the kingdom of heaven is like root beer and coffee stirred together. Oh wait, you guys don't know that yet, do you? Seriously though, Third Wave Coffee in Belding. Talk to Pastor Peter and tell him that Pastor Jason sent you, because he's got a drink called the Kingdom of Heaven. And believe it or not, it is root beer and coffee together, and it's like the Kingdom of Heaven. Okay, sorry, he's a pastor. I can pitch his coffee place. Maybe not. As I studied this week, aside from thinking about Peter's coffee, I was reminded of an experience, or actually as I was in the process of studying, I had an experience this week that brought up this thing that I had written and shared back on August 30th. I had been writing some words of expressing gratitude to many of the people who have poured out into my life, and all the many things that they had poured into me and taught me, like recognizing how each individual person had taught me an individual thing, and how they had invested into who I am. And then as part of that, I followed on and I shared some words of wisdom that I think that I had learned along the way. Words I had learned about myself and about this journey together. Actually, words that I have shared with you in many different sermons along the way. I said this, I said, personal experience has taught me to be myself. Let the chips fall where they may, because it destroys me to try to be someone else or to fill someone else's shoes. I'd rather be unemployed than serving a church that doesn't want me. I don't need a job badly enough to fake who I am. These are things that I have learned along the way, and they were words that I had decided to share as part of this expression of gratitude to the people who had taught me and shaped me. And as we had this discussion this week, I thought maybe this is a good opportunity for us to exercise what we had learned last week. Perhaps if you remember from last week, we talked about Martin Luther's explanation to the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. Well, Luther said, if you remember that we should defend our neighbor, think and speak well of them, and put the best construction on everything. And this seemed an opportunity to have an exercise in application, because I had heard some concerning words just this week that perhaps the wrong idea had been gotten about the words that I had shared. And so when I said personal experience has taught me to be myself and let the chips fall where they may, and these things in here, what I was sharing with you is the same thing that I've been teaching you from the pulpit. God loves you. He loves you, not who you should be in somebody else's box, but he loves you for who you are and how he has created you individually. And it doesn't do you any good to try to be someone else. You ever heard the proverb, be yourself? Everyone else is already taken? That's kind of what I was saying. And when I said I'd rather be unemployed than serving in a church that doesn't want me, I don't need a job badly enough to fake who I am, what I was expressing was gratitude for a church that allows me to be who I am. To be in a congregation who accepts me for me. And knows that I'm not one of the other faces on the wall back there in the hallway as you come in. We have many pastors with many gifts and much history. And so we have an opportunity in these words, as we read these words elsewhere, when we come to them, we can consider them as, I suppose you could come away from this thinking that Pastor Jason must be miserable. Or you could put a different construction on it, and perhaps you could say, I'm glad that Pastor Jason is in a place where he feels like he can share these wisdoms and that he can share who he is as a person. And the applications just continue It's amazing when Scripture connects with what's going on in the world around us, and just out of the blue we find pathways into what the Word is saying to us and how it connects with our lives and what we're doing right and experiencing right now. And again, we come through this story, our gospel reading has Jesus and his disciples coming along the road, and he's teaching them about his death and his resurrection and what he must endure. And along the way, they were arguing with each other over who was the most important among them. Gasped when we read that about somebody else, like the disciples, but we should consider this as a lesson for ourselves as well. I encountered a similar experience just this week as we were having discussions about visits and spending time with people and who was more valuable or who was more important or where the time should be delivered. And we have been celebrating great things in the congregation. We've been celebrating new baptisms and new members and revitalized ministries, and we've had great things. I've seen on the faces of people the joy of ministry revitalized. But part of life together in a family is to have contention, to have debates and discussions about how we do ministry. And so we had some discussion this week over pastoral visits and where they fit into the greater ministry and what's happening and what's not happening and what's important and what's not important and where our attentions should be. And I think in all of these discussions, we also have to realize that none of us really has the big picture about what all of our ministries are doing here. We really don't. I couldn't tell you everything. I'm in here all the time. I mean, it's where I'm supposed to be, right? In here paying attention to the ministries. But because we are such a great and involved congregation with so many ministries, I couldn't tell you everything that the Winslow Circle's doing or the sisters are doing. But we work alongside each other in those ministries. And we can have conflicts and disputes, as James says. Did you pick that up in our reading this week in James? We can cling to conflicts and disputes, or we can give grace to one another. Again, as Martin Luther encourages us to put the best construction on everything that's going on. So when we know that somebody who's ministering here in some way is doing what they're doing, put the best construction on what they're doing. And so the discussion struck me as an opportunity to apply what we had learned just last Sunday about gossip. And not talking about people who aren't in the room, or talking to people instead of talking about people. And it's another opportunity, as with these words that I wrote, to come and talk to me, or when you've heard something about somebody else, put the best construction on it, and if you don't understand, come and talk to them. Matthew 18 is our model for this. Our covenant is our model for this, drawn from Matthew 18. We come together as a covenant family with one another. Jesus himself, we saw in this reading that Jesus himself said things that his own disciples didn't understand. I think none of us are probably better than Jesus, so we're probably going to be saying things around each other that we might have to ask some questions about and maybe get some clarity. Maybe it's even an opportunity to spend some time together over one of those Kingdom of Heaven coffee and root beers down at Third Wave. Or somewhere here in Greenville. Remember last week in our sermon how I talked about how quickly the rumor had spread and how far the rumor had spread about me being fired? Like I couldn't even come back from vacation and I was getting an email or a text message from somebody not even associated with this congregation expressing their condolences over my firing. Rumors travel. Gossip fuels it. So we need to be careful about the things that we hear about one another. James cautions us that envy and selfish ambition create disorder, conflict, and disputes. But kingdom wisdom creates pure, peaceable, and impartial good fruits of righteousness that are gentle and merciful. James suggests that when we encounter disputes and conflict where we cling to bitter envy and selfish ambition, that these may be for our personal indulgences. Now, don't hear this wrong. James is not suggesting that we will never experience struggle or contention. Of course we will. But we, and this is from our covenant, we covenant with each other to strive to express Christ's Spirit in our individual and corporate life, living together as Christian brothers and sisters. There's a lot loaded into that, isn't there? We covenant. That's more than a contract. That's more than a handshake. We covenant with each other to strive to express Christ's Spirit in our individual and corporate life, living together as Christian brothers and sisters. James seems perhaps in this to be giving us a test for checking how we're living with one another, for checking how we're living together as a covenant family. Are we experiencing peace and mercy, impartiality, and gentleness? Or are we experiencing disorder, conflict, and disputes instead? Jesus encourages us in the gospel today with these words: whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. What a joy. What a hope. What a peace that comes from knowing that the good news is that we are not left without a way. That though we struggle and we strive and we misinterpret and we get in the way of our own selves, that Jesus' entire life teaching, death, and resurrection leads us along this pilgrim path together toward understanding, unity, and love. The simple acts of putting others ahead of ourselves, the simple act of putting others ahead of ourselves, of listening before speaking, of extending gentleness and mercy, of applying the best possible construction on all that we see and hear about one another. These things are not easy, to be sure. We talked last week about the tongue and how difficult it is for us to tame it, for how difficult it is for us to be a people engaged with one another in passion for faith in Christ and life together. How difficult it is for us to live this out. And so it is difficult, but it is simple, and it is true. Remember what we learned from James about our words and our language. Remember to trust that Jesus promises that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. So remember to trust what Jesus promises about the church's enduring together. And remember what Jesus teaches us about loving one another. And not to give you simple but abstract ideas, perhaps it's worthwhile to visit 1 Corinthians 13 when we talk about loving one another. It's often used in weddings, and sometimes it can be cliche, but it is so profound and so true and so applicable to us today. As we strive to love one another, we must remember that love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. Let us go now to face a new week together with the spirit of peace, having the assurance that God walks with each of us, individually and all of us together. Let us go now to face our challenges, new and old, with renewed faith, having the assurance that God is truly guiding us along the way. Let us go now alongside each other with hearts lifted on limitless love, having the assurance that God set the example by first loving us. Therefore, we can love God and we can love one another. May this be true for all of us this week and ever.